May 1475. The 11th month of the siege of Neuss. Inside the city, a man lies dying. Suddenly, a horn sounds. Then, the beating of drums. Hermann of Hesse jumps up, runs to the eastern watchtower, and looks out. Hundreds of flags appear. The double-headed Black Eagle of the Holy Roman Empire. Tens of thousands of Emperor Frederick III's troops are marching in from behind the Burgundian army. He looks down at the city below, shattered stone walls, emaciated survivors. His 4,000 men are now just over 1,500. Outside the walls, 20,000 Burgundian soldiers are still there, ready to crush the fortress of Neuss. Charles the Bold stands outside, facing Neuss. He turns his head to look back. Behind him, the imperial army is forming up. In front of him, the walls of Neuss still stand after 11 months of siege. 11 months ago, when 20,000 Burgundian troops closed the net, Hermann said one thing: "Just hold on, reinforcements will come." Reinforcements have arrived, but they are still too far away. Right against the walls, 20,000 Burgundians have loaded their guns. Charles the Bold is caught in the middle, and he could completely level this fortress before that massive army could take a step forward. How did 4,000 people inside Neuss hold out for 11 months? Pushing the most powerful war machine in Europe to its absolute limit. The year is 1474. Europe is a chaotic puzzle of kingdoms and city-states. No order, no real center of power, and right in the middle of the continent, there is a man who wants to redraw that entire map. Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. He doesn't hold the title of king, but he controls the richest merchant cities in Europe, richer than many surrounding kingdoms. His only problem is, his realm is split in two, half in the south, half in the north, cut right through the middle by the Holy Roman Empire. Two pieces of land, no connecting road. Charles's goal is crystal clear: connect those two pieces, create a new empire. To do that, he needs to control the lifeline of Central Europe, the Rhine River. Whoever holds the Rhine holds the flow of goods and money. Whoever holds the money holds the power. It's that simple. Standing guard on that river is Cologne, a massive trade hub. And the key to unlocking Cologne is a tiny fortress just a few kilometers away: Neuss. Whoever takes Neuss blows the doors wide open to the Rhine. In 1473, a local political crisis breaks out in this region. Charles the Bold instantly seizes the chance. Under the guise of bringing an army to protect and restore order, he marches a massive force straight into the Rhineland. The reality: his goal is to swallow the Neuss gateway whole. Inside the walls of Neuss at that time is Hermann of Hesse. Not a general, not a professional warrior, just a diocese administrator in his early 30s. But when the Burgundian army shows up, he is the only one to step up and organize the defense. Hermann has a clear calculation. Neuss doesn't need to win. Neuss just needs to hold out long enough. If Charles controls the Rhine, Emperor Frederick III of the Holy Roman Empire loses his trade lifeline and will be forced to step in. That is the only card Hermann has to play. And he decides to play it to the bitter end. He decides to fight to the death just to wait. Charles the Bold brings 20,000 elite mercenaries to Neuss, recruited from all over Europe. A highly professional army, along with the best bronze artillery system in Europe at the time. Inside Neuss, only 4,000 people, including local militia. Weapons are scarce and degrading. The odds are 5 to 1, but two factors changed this dynamic. First is the terrain. Neuss is surrounded by flooded swamps. Cavalry cannot charge. Siege towers and heavy cannons sink into the mud. Burgundy's numbers advantage is heavily neutralized. Second is the issue of time. The siege begins in July 1474. The city's food will only last until Christmas. That means they have 5 months. But the emperor's reinforcements won't arrive for another 11 months. Why 11 months? Because the Holy Roman Empire is not a single, unified machine. It is a patchwork of hundreds of smaller states, duchies, bishoprics, and free cities. Emperor Frederick III cannot just snap his fingers and march. He has no standing army of his own. To build an army, he must beg. He must negotiate with hesitant lords. He must make political compromises. He must collect funds from princes who only care about their own borders. A diet must be called. Letters must be sent across hundreds of miles on horseback. The bureaucracy grinds at a painfully slow pace. Every single soldier, every horse, every wagon takes time to gather. And while the emperor debates with nobles in warm castles, 4,000 people in Neuss are left entirely alone, cut off from the world, waiting for a rescue that feels like a ghost. 6 months of food, 11 months of waiting, and that is the gap where Neuss must figure out how to survive. Hermann doesn't wait for the cannonballs to fly before starting. The moment news of the advancing Burgundian army reaches Neuss, he issues orders. Gather all the food in the city. Every sack of grain, every barrel of salt, every jar of sauerkraut, centralize it at a single checkpoint. Hand it out in rations, day by day, no exceptions. Reinforce the walls. Set up sniper positions at the loopholes. Check the water supply lines. Check the crypts beneath the St. Quirinus Basilica, the largest 13th century Romanesque church in the city. The crypts below will become shelters for women and children, and a hospital. Then Hermann speaks plainly to the soldiers and the people. No fancy words, no grand promises. Reinforcements will not come immediately. Emperor Frederick III needs time to gather his army. Neuss must hold out until then. Just hold on, reinforcements will come. That is the only thing he can give them right now, besides swords and spears and stone walls. July 1474. Burgundy arrives. They lock down all 6 city gates, cut off the land routes into Neuss. The bombardment begins, and it is unlike anything the Rhineland has ever seen. Charles has brought the most terrifying siege weapons of the era, massive bronze bombards, cast by the finest gunsmiths in Europe. When they fire, the earth literally shakes. A deafening roar shatters eardrums and echoes for miles. Black smoke chokes the air. Then comes the impact. Solid stone balls, weighing dozens of kilograms, traveling at terrifying speeds, slamming directly into the soft, tough stone walls of Neuss. The kinetic energy is catastrophic. The tough stone doesn't just crack, it explodes. Chunks of stone break off. Lethal shrapnel rains down like hail on the defenders. Dust clouds turn day into night. And outside the walls, waiting for the breach, are the mercenaries. 20,000 professional killers. English longbowmen, Italian crossbowmen, pikemen from the Low Countries. Veterans of countless campaigns who fight for gold and blood. They wear heavy plate armor. They wield halberds and hand cannons. They are highly disciplined, ruthlessly efficient, and incredibly deadly. They outnumber the defenders 5-1. Looking down from the walls, the people of Neuss see a sea of steel. An unstoppable machine designed only to destroy. A professional army that expects to wipe out this town in weeks, making the sight of women and old men picking up mud to patch the walls even more surreal. Night falls. The people of Neuss come out, carrying mud, carrying wood, carrying rubble. Men, women, the elderly, anyone who can still stand, patching, stuffing, piling it up. Every morning, Burgundy looks over. The wall is still there, not intact, but standing. This is what you need to understand about the people of Neuss. They don't fight like people with an advantage. They fight like people with no other choice. The Hessian mercenaries. These men come from Hesse in central Germany, hundreds of kilometers away. They are not from Neuss. They are not protecting their homes, but they stay, because Hermann stays. August. Burgundy deploys boats to capture small islands on the Rhine. The goal: control the waterway, cut off all river supply lines. They take them, but the river doesn't care if you wear good armor or bad armor. The price is paid in corpses drifting down the Rhine. September. Burgundian infantry assault the city gates directly. Hermann pushes them back. Nothing flashy, nothing spectacular, holding every single meter. Fight, then pull back. Patch up what was just destroyed. Then the militia of Cologne, the massive city right across the Rhine, release fire ships, little boats stuffed with oil-soaked dry rags, bursting into flames, drifting with the current, ramming into Burgundy's pontoon bridges. The bridges burn. The supply line is disrupted. Neuss is not entirely alone. The outside world is still watching. This is the most dangerous phase, not because of cannon fire, but because of doubt. The crypts beneath St. Quirinus Basilica turn into a hospital, but hospital is a generous word. It is a dark, subterranean nightmare. The ceilings are brutally low. The thick stone walls sweat with freezing moisture. There is no natural light, only the dim, flickering glow of tallow candies. Shadows dance on the walls like ghosts. The air is thick, heavy with the metallic stench of blood, the sickening sweet smell of rotting flesh and gangrene, and the stagnant breath of hundreds of packed, unwashed bodies. Every corner echoes with the sounds of suffering, the muffled groans of mercenaries with shattered limbs, the feverish delirium of children, the weeping of mothers who have no milk left to give. Disease spreads through the cramped shelters like wildfire, dysentery, typhus. Then comes the winter of 1474-1475. It is brutally, unnaturally cold. The bone-chilling draft cuts through the crypts. People huddle together for warmth, wrapped in filthy, lice-infested rags. Above ground, the Erft River freezes at the banks. The mud freezes hard as concrete. The dead don't even have soft earth to be buried in. They are stacked in frozen piles in the alleys, and hunger becomes the cruelest enemy. The food stores deplete week by week. First, the salted pork disappears, then the dry bread. Meals are reduced to a watery, tasteless porridge. Then they boil leather straps and old shoes just to have something to chew. They dig up frozen tree roots from the monastery garden. Finally, the children are sent to hunt rats in the dark corners of the crypts. Even the rats are starving. A roasted rat becomes a luxury, a feast for a dying man. Despair hangs heavier than the smoke of the bombards, and there's still no sign of reinforcements. This is when the belief Hermann planted in the summer truly gets tested. Not by Burgundy's swords, but by the whispered question in the cold night, is the emperor really coming? Hermann doesn't answer with words. He answers with actions. On the darkest nights of that winter, Hermann leads small squads outside the walls. Not to win, not to break the siege. Crawling through the frozen swamps in the dark, bellies to the ground, holding their breath. The Burgundian supply camps. Fire, retreat. Not because these raids turned the tide of the war. They weren't big enough to do that. But every morning after hearing explosions outside, the Hessian soldier on the wall knows. Their commander still goes out in the night. Their commander still believes. No one gives up when the man standing in front of them hasn't given up. And on the Rhine, during moonless nights, a different kind of war is fought. Small, fragile wooden boats silently cut through the icy black water. Inside, men disguised as Burgundian soldiers, or fishermen wearing nothing but ragged wool tunics. Under the dry grass in the hull is wheat, a few precious sacks, not enough to feed an army, but enough to keep a dozen families alive for a few more days. These are the smugglers of Cologne. They wear no plate armor. They carry no swords or halberds, just wooden oars and a desperate courage. The wind cuts through their wet clothes. Their lips are bruised blue from the freezing cold. Their hands are blistered and numb. They navigate the treacherous currents in absolute, terrified silence. If an oar splashes too loudly, they are dead. Suddenly, a light pierces the darkness on the riverbank. Burgundian patrol torches sweep across the water. The smugglers freeze, faces pressed flat against the damp, freezing deck, holding their breath until their lungs burn. Praying to God, the light passes over them. The line between life and death is razor thin. If caught, there is no trial. The result is a brutal beating, followed by the gallows at dawn. Their bodies left hanging as a warning. If successful, they slip through the blockade, trading their lives for a few sacks of wheat. Those are the people of Cologne. Not every army fights with spears. Some fight with small boats in the dead of night. History records the name Hermann of Hesse. History records the name Charles the Bold. History records the name Frederick III. History does not record the name of the woman who carried mud every night to patch the wall. It does not record the blacksmith who recycled shrapnel into nails for scaffolding. It does not record the 12-year-old child who stood passing rocks from hand to hand all night long. But without them, the walls would have collapsed by the third month. What kept Neuss standing wasn't military tactics. It wasn't a favorable geographic location. It wasn't thick stone walls. It was 4,000 human beings who decided that tonight they weren't giving up. And the next morning they made that decision one more time. 11 months. Making that decision over 300 times. April 1475. The 9th month. News slips into the city. The Grand Imperial Army is marching toward the Rhineland. Hermann has been waiting for this for 9 months. Charles the Bold knows it too, and he ramps up the assault. Bombards firing by day, bombards firing by night. The explosions are no longer a shock. They become the background noise of life inside Neuss. The walls crack further. Another section collapses. The people of Neuss come out, carrying scrap wood from demolished houses inside the city, stuffing it into the gaps. Anything harder than air. Leather armor straps crack, they tie a knot. The knot breaks, they tie it again. Chainmail links snap, they replace them with rope. The rope rots, they replace it with rags. This is the 10th month, the 11th month. These Hessian soldiers have been here longer than anyone could have planned. Their original armor has become patches strapped over patches. But they are still standing there. Hermann personally mans the most fiercely attacked sections of the wall. Not because there are no men left, because his men are looking at him. When the commander stands in the most dangerous spot, the soldier behind him doesn't run. That is all Hermann needs them to do. Don't run. Just don't run. May. The Imperial vanguard clashes with Burgundian forces at Rechberg, a territory just north of Neuss, right on the Imperial Army's path. A small skirmish, but enough for Charles to understand. He is trapped. In front of him, the walls of Neuss still stand. Behind him, the Imperial Army is forming up. He cannot fight a two-front war. The best artillery in Europe is useless when the enemy is at your back. The best cavalry in Europe is useless when the jaws of the trap snap shut. 11 months. Tens of thousands of troops, the best artillery on the continent. All of it stopped cold by 4,000 people. Not 4,000 heroes. 4,000 starving, exhausted people, holding their armor together with rags. 4,000 people who decided, not today. Charles signs the retreat treaty. May 27, 1475. No massive final battle, no clear dramatic climax. Just Burgundy soldiers begin packing up their tents. Then they leave. Emperor Frederick III enters Neuss. Before him stand the Hessian soldiers. Emaciated, skin and bones, armor held together by rags, but standing tall. Frederick III grants them special rewards and honors, officially recorded into the Imperial Chronicles. The people who held the city when the rest of Europe couldn't get there in time. How powerful can belief be? Afterward, history recorded the numbers. 20,000 Burgundian troops, the best artillery in Europe, 11 months, facing off against 4,000 people inside a small city by the Rhine. The result: Burgundy retreats. They didn't lose in battle, they lost to time. Charles the Bold continued waging wars after that. He died in 1477 at the Battle of Nancy, in what is now eastern France. His body was found 2 days later, face down in the mud. His kingdom between the two seas was never built. Neuss still exists today, a city in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, in western Germany. The St. Quirinus Basilica still stands. The crypts that once held hundreds of people hiding from cannon fire are still there. Hermann of Hesse continued his role as a diocese administrator. He never became a massive legend in popular history. He was just the man who stayed and didn't give up. 11 months, eating rats, patching walls with mud, raiding in the dead of night, continuing to stand the next morning. Not a single day of surrender. Hermann of Hesse had nothing to promise but one thing: just hold on. Reinforcements will come. He didn't know for sure if Frederick III would arrive in time. He didn't know for sure if Neuss wouldn't fall just 1 day prior. He didn't know anything for sure, but he believed. And he made 4,000 people believe with him. In the end, reinforcements came, exactly as he said. History remembers Neuss as a military victory, a geopolitical victory, a victory of endurance. But before all of that, it is a story about belief. The belief that if you just don't fall today, tomorrow will be different. How powerful is that belief? Powerful enough for a small city by the Rhine, with 4,000 exhausted people, to force the greatest war machine in Europe to turn around and walk away